is joint mobilization, right? I can make it look so gentle and so flowing, right, that you look and say, oh, wow, that's no problem, I can do that. Now, by the way, just starting with this, I'm doing two things. I'm both putting a motion in to feel the response of his tissue, which is an assessment, and I'm putting motion in to challenge the tissue to move, to make it move better, which is a treatment. When you do the assessment, it is called motion palpation, or at least that's one term for it. Motion palpation. I'm palpating him, but not statically. I'm not just feeling for the static position of the bones, I'm feeling for the motion. That's an assessment, but it's also a treatment because I challenge the area to move, and if I increase motion, then I'm breaking up adhesions and loosening muscles and moving joint, body fluids around and all that, right? Just a little bit I'm doing here, this little bit, which is so gentle, and I can say that he moves really nicely when I challenge him to move from the left to the right. But when I challenge on the right, I feel restriction. It just doesn't move as freely. Now, we can talk about joint mobilization for pure lateral flexion, for pure rotation, for 45 degrees in between, we can talk about it with all these details, but let's start with the biggest picture. The biggest picture is every joint, when you bring it to its end range of motion, should have a bounce, should have a spring to it. If it doesn't have a healthy end feel, if it feels like you're pushing against a rock wall, then that is a hypomobile joint, and it needs to be mobilized. If you bring it to the end of its range of motion, it goes really, really far beyond what normally would happen, and it feels mushy at the end, that's a hypermobile joint. Hyper. So hypo, hyper. Not enough, too much. Now, the indication for joint mobilization is a hypomobile joint. The indication is not pain, or lack of pain, or smiling, or frowning, or anything else. There's only one indication. The indication is if a joint is restricted in its motion, and the end feels like you're hitting a stone wall, a rock wall, a hard end field, then that means the joint needs to be mobilized, right? So, you mobilize hypomobile joints. You are contraindicated to mobilize hypermobile joints. Okay? Hypermobile joints, right. If ligaments are loose, joint capsules are loose, for the most part, there's nothing left except to strengthen, to stabilize the area. So you have three things that determine mobility/stability at a joint, right? Three basic things. One is flexibility of soft tissue. Muscles, their tendons, ligaments, joint capsules, fascial planes, etc. The other is strength of musculature, right? And the third one is the bony shape. You're not going to change someone's bony shape, at least not over a short run. If it's going to change, it's based on postures that can happen over years or decades. So let's take that out of the equation. We don't change their bony shape. So what else is there? There's loosening taut soft tissue, and there's strengthening musculature. If you loosen their soft tissue more and more and more and more, they become more and more and more mobile. Is that good? Oh, I'm more mobile. That's good. Oh, I'm less stable. That's bad. More mobility is usually less stability. More stability is less mobility. Every joint needs to find a balance of those two, right? Now, you can increase mobility by loosening everything, by stretching a lot, doing yoga a lot, loosening up, right? And then you become less stable, but you can compensate for that by then strengthening. And then if you are loose and strong, you're theoretically the healthiest because you have mobility and stability. So dancers, yoga people, gymnasts, Pilates people, they tend to be the healthiest because they're very loose and they're very strong. But danger, danger. Once you make ligaments and joint capsules loose, they basically pretty much stay loose for your whole life. So if you take someone who's a dancer, and they dance 2 hours a day, every day, and one day they get to be 30 years old, and they get married, and they have kids, and they stop dancing, their ligaments stay loose, and their muscles get weak. And now they end up being hypermobile.
Yeah.
And they don't get hurt too often because when forces get placed in their body, their tissues give. But when they do get hurt, they are the hardest people to get well. Because the problem is not taut tissue that you take care of with hydrotherapy and massage and joint mobilization and stretching. All that's left is strengthening for them, right? And you have to hope that they're willing to strengthen. Because a lot of people get lazy when they get older and they stop exercising. Okay? Okay, so back to here. So I can show it like I just showed it, really nice and sweet and gentle. Or I can be a bit more precise and a bit more assertive. I can come in here, and I can come in, and I can challenge one of his joints just released. That's great. Okay, good. These need to release on this side because they're hypomobile. Okay? And I can feel the range of motion, and I can be very consistent with a default of, a default, is the word default good?
Yes.
Yes. Right? Kind of like what you automatically start by doing. I can do it as a default in pretty much straight lateral flexion. And I'd like that to be our default. But what we'll need to understand in time is that we are searching for restrictions. And when we search for restrictions, it's kind of like if I, let me do this like this, that's in the way. If I bring him perfectly up in the frontal plane and I'm feeling for restrictions, maybe he moves fine here, but then I bring him over here, oh, there's the restriction, right? A little there, a little here, rotate here, right? You're searching for a restriction, right? Well, that's what we're doing here. We're searching for a restriction. So I might come in here and go like this, but then maybe I'll add a little more rotation, right? I'm looking for a hard end feel, and once I find that, there, right there, there's a definite restriction. And now I can stay there and mobilize that. So if you're new to joint mobilization, I want you to start with just a formula to begin with, a default formula of going into lateral flexion. If you're more experienced with joint mobilization, then I want you to definitely be creative about how you feel for the restriction, because there's no right or wrong joint motion to challenge. As long as the joint will allow that motion, it's a valid thing to challenge that motion. And between the two facet joints and the disc joint, the spine moves in all three planes, around all three axes, and therefore there's almost no motion that you couldn't challenge, right? Okay, so what we need to do this is we need to find the facets. So here we go. Here's